So Camilla's grip over the sovereign grant is gone, stripped away by a panel of judges in a single afternoon. And here's the strange part. What brought the whole thing crashing down wasn't a stolen fortune or some sprawling conspiracy. It was a place card that never made it onto a table, and a finance officer who folded a sheet of paper into his jacket because he was too frightened to sign it. That's where this entire story actually lives, in one small moment where a mid-level palace official decided that staying quiet had become more dangerous than speaking up. And the moment he made that choice, the carefully managed illusion of control simply dissolved. Before we get into all of it, take 1 second to subscribe to Crown Insiders so you don't miss what comes next. Because this gets stranger the deeper we go. All of the following is dramatized and speculative. None of it has been confirmed by the palace, and the officials, rulings and conversations described here should be understood as rumour and reconstruction rather than established fact. King Charles reportedly walked into that courtroom bracing for a hard day. What he allegedly got instead was the complete dismantling of an arrangement that had quietly governed his household for years. Sources suggest the judges didn't hand down a gentle warning or a few procedural tweaks. They're said to have removed Camilla entirely from every part of the sovereign grant process. She reportedly can't approve spending, she can't shape it, she can't redirect it, she can't so much as advise on where it goes. Her representatives were allegedly pulled from oversight meetings, her financial briefings suspended. And then, this is the part that matters. The court is said to have ordered an independent review of every decision that had ever carried her approval. That's the judicial equivalent of saying, we're not only worried about the future, we're worried about what already happened. Charles reportedly sat with his glasses lowered, turning no pages, speaking to no aides. When someone leaned toward him, he's said to have simply raised one hand. Across the aisle, Camilla allegedly closed her folder with great care, and that carefulness said more than any outburst ever could. She understood at once that this wasn't a negotiation. The order supposedly took effect right there, in that room, while they were still seated. Now, for anyone who hasn't followed the mechanics of royal funding, the sovereign grant is the public money that pays for official royal duties, staff salaries, travel, ceremonies, the upkeep of occupied residences. It's the operational budget of the monarchy. Whoever controls it controls which priorities move forward and which ones quietly vanish. And the court, according to these accounts, looked at the Queen Consort and told her she no longer had any say in a single pound of it. But here's the part that cut deepest for Charles. It wasn't only that his wife had lost influence, it's that the judgment reportedly suggested he had failed to hold the line between his marriage and the monarchy itself. A king's discretion only functions if the public trusts that discretion. The ruling allegedly implied that trust had been compromised, and that Charles either never saw it happening or chose not to stop it. That's a humiliation deeper than any policy fight. That's a judgment on his judgment. So what actually happened? Sources suggest the court exposed that several spending proposals had moved through what they described as an unofficial advisory channel tied to Camilla's private office. Not everything got approved, but the judges reportedly concluded that personal preference had pressed up against constitutional expenditure. Sit with that phrase for a second, because it's doing an enormous amount of careful legal work. What they're allegedly saying is that money meant for public royal duties was being shaped by private preference, and they claim to have the documentation to prove it. Camilla, it said, sat through this, realizing it was no longer about one isolated decision. The court had identified a pattern, a hidden one. And then Charles reportedly found the line in the judgment that must have made his stomach drop. Someone inside the royal household had handed financial correspondence directly to independent examiners. This hadn't come from the outside. Not from journalists, not from critics, not from anti-monarchists. It had come from someone close enough to know exactly where the evidence was kept, and brave enough, or angry enough, to give it up. The man allegedly at the center of that decision was named Martin Hale, the deputy keeper of finance. And the event said to have cracked everything open had a perfectly forgettable name, the Windsor Cultural Patrons Reception. When the palace first tried to reconstruct that evening, everyone reportedly waved the reception off as routine, the kind of thing that happens constantly. But the judges kept circling back to it, because one exchange from that night allegedly surfaced again and again in correspondence more than a year old. So they dug, and what they found, sources suggest, was the point of no return. Here's how it's said to have unfolded. Camilla's office had reportedly been drifting deeper into decisions about receptions, charitable engagements, staffing changes, and refurbishment priorities. Some of those events genuinely served official duties. Some of them also happened to benefit patronages tied closely to individual family members, and the line between public expense and private preference grew harder and harder to defend. For years, palace administrators had handled these questions through precedent and trust. Someone would say, "This is how we've always done it," and that was usually enough. But a newer generation of finance officers had reportedly started demanding written justification whenever sovereign grant money was in play. They wanted a paper trail. They wanted to know why public funds were paying for specific events and who exactly was signing off. That quiet shift in internal culture is what allegedly set the stage for Windsor. At that reception, Camilla reportedly approached Martin Hale in private and asked him to reclassify an expanded hospitality program as an official, state-facing engagement. The revised costs are said to have included extra guest accommodation, private transport, and alterations to reception rooms connected to organizations inside her preferred patronage network. Hale was allegedly standing beside a side table, holding the amended expenditure sheet. Camilla's voice stayed controlled. She's said to have placed one finger beside the classification code and told him the king expected the reception to proceed without delay. That's the line. 6 words that reportedly unraveled everything. The king expected the reception to proceed. Hale, according to these accounts, didn't argue. He didn't push back. But once she'd walked away, he folded the unsigned sheet, slipped it inside his jacket, and that same night reportedly told another official, a woman named Eleanor Price, that he couldn't approve the classification without independent review. Price allegedly warned him that refusing could end both their careers, but Hale had supposedly heard something in that exchange that frightened him more than losing a job. By invoking Charles's expectation, a request had quietly transformed into implied royal pressure. It was no longer colleagues talking. It was a directive carrying the weight of the sovereign's name. Now, Camilla almost certainly believed she was protecting an event built to strengthen the monarchy's cultural ties. In her mind, sources suggest the objections were needless bureaucracy. She'd served for years. She'd absorbed hostility, scrutiny, and public rejection, and she probably felt her judgment should have earned trust long ago. But Hale reportedly felt the opposite. He saw a line being crossed, and he realized that silence would make him responsible for whatever came next. So he allegedly began preserving emails, meeting notes, handwritten instructions. And weeks later, here's the twist, revised documents supposedly appeared, using language almost identical to the disputed request. Hale had never signed the original, but someone, it said, had forced the decision through by another route. He was now convinced of it. He had the receipts. When that evidence reportedly reached external examiners, Charles believed the whole thing could still be contained. But then Camilla allegedly spotted Hale's name in the inquiry file and demanded a private confrontation, which pushed the king toward a question he'd spent months avoiding. For days, Charles reportedly refused to ask it. He defended Camilla publicly. He challenged the severity of the court's restrictions. He demanded loyalty from his staff. But one line from Martin Hale's testimony supposedly kept circling in his mind. The Queen Consort had invoked the king's expectation, and when Charles and Camilla finally stood alone together, he's said to have laid the testimony on the table and asked her 6 words of his own. "Did you use my name to force that approval?" That question allegedly turned a legal crisis into a marital reckoning. Charles knew he'd never examined the reclassification himself, which left only 3 possibilities. His wishes had been misunderstood, exaggerated, or deliberately used. Camilla reportedly refused to accept that ordinary palace practice had somehow become evidence of wrongdoing. She argued that royal work had always run on verbal understanding, delegated judgment, and trust. To her, sources suggest officials were rewriting long-standing customs simply because public pressure demanded a visible target, and she'd become the easiest one to sacrifice. Charles allegedly pushed Hale's documented account toward her. She wouldn't touch it. He reportedly told her that a sovereign's name could never become a shortcut around financial controls. His voice stayed low, but his hand is said to have trembled as he removed his signet ring and set it beside the file. That ring carries his royal identity. Placing it down like that was symbolic in a way words couldn't reach. Camilla, it said, watched a wall rising between them. She reminded him of the years she'd absorbed hostility to protect his emotional stability. And now she allegedly told him the moment the institution turned on her, he was starting to sound like the judges rather than the man who'd promised never to abandon her. Then she reportedly admitted something. After Hale refused, she'd instructed her office to resolve the classification problem, but she denied ever ordering anyone to falsify documents. Charles asked who had prepared the revised wording. Camilla allegedly named her private secretary, and then Charles reportedly had to tell her that the private secretary had already given a recorded statement saying the instructions came directly from her. The silence that followed was the kind that changes a relationship permanently. Charles is said to have risen and moved toward the door without embracing her. She asked whether William had shaped his response. He didn't answer. And that silence revealed something bigger. The crisis had become a struggle over who would define the monarchy's future. But here's the thing, neither Charles nor Camilla could reverse any of it because the ruling had already handed control to a small oversight group whose quiet authority now outweighed every private promise made inside the palace. And this is where the story shifts from royal drama into something more structural. The people who now held the power weren't the ones with titles and ceremonies. They were accountants, constitutional advisors, treasury representatives, independent auditors. They didn't shout, they didn't threaten, they didn't seek revenge. They allegedly just opened the files, compared the signatures, and began removing royal discretion one line at a time. For Charles, that calm was reportedly more frightening than open rebellion. The panel chair supposedly paused beside him before the first meeting and said the review existed to protect the crown, not to embarrass the king. Charles reportedly replied that the embarrassment had already happened. This small external body now held temporary authority over every disputed sovereign grant decision. They could freeze spending, demand records, review finance-related appointments, and reject any project that lacked a clear official purpose. Inside that room, rank meant nothing. Classification meant everything. One panel member, someone named Reed, allegedly explained that any event serving mainly personal interests would have to be privately funded from now on. Charles reportedly asked whether royal discretion still carried weight after generations of practice. Another member, named Jonathan, is said to have answered that tradition could guide judgment, but could never replace written accountability. The king stayed silent, but that silence revealed how deeply the answer had landed. William attended these sessions as an observer, and he reportedly avoided every hint of triumph because he understood something genuinely complicated. The reforms might protect a monarchy he'd one day inherit, but watching his father lose control brought him no satisfaction at all. At one point, sources suggest Charles dropped his pen. William instinctively reached for it, but the monarch retrieved it first, turning a small accident into a quiet refusal of help. That one gesture captured the entire dynamic between them, the heir trying to hold the institution together, the king feeling replaced by his own son. Then the files widened, the crisis. The Windsor Reception, it turned out, wasn't the only proposal whose description had reportedly changed after objections were raised. Staffing expansions, residence alterations, transport arrangements, hospitality costs linked to Camilla's office, all of them, it's alleged, had been broadened until private preference started to look like official necessity. Reed reportedly stressed that improper influence didn't automatically prove personal enrichment. The deeper danger was structural. An unofficial channel had formed through which the Queen Consort's preferences received unusual priority, and that channel now had to be dismantled completely. The panel announced immediate restrictions. Her advisors would be removed from grant-related meetings, pending proposals would be frozen, and William, of all people, would be the one to enforce the order. The prince reportedly understood exactly what that meant. He would have to carry the judgment into his father's household himself, not as a bureaucrat delivering paperwork, but as a son telling his father's wife that her access had been revoked. By nightfall, the judgment was no longer confined to courtroom language. Doors were reportedly being locked, invitations withdrawn, names struck from meeting lists, and Camilla was about to discover just how fast ceremonial influence can vanish. Because power rarely disappears with a trumpet blast. Sometimes it disappears through a cancelled meeting, a disabled access card, or a chair quietly pulled from a table. For Camilla, the new reality reportedly arrived as a series of small exclusions that grew impossible to ignore. By the end of that first day, she remained queen consort in title, but inside the financial machinery of the palace, she'd allegedly become an outsider. Her office could still handle her personal schedule, correspondence, charities, and privately funded work. But the oversight order now barred her from any meeting touching sovereign grant allocations or publicly financed staff. Every decision connected to that money required strict distance from her. And then came the moment that probably stung more than the courtroom ruling ever did. Camilla reportedly approached the weekly financial planning meeting and found her usual place card gone from the table. A palace official quietly informed her that attendance was now restricted. She looked through the open doorway and saw William already seated inside. The future king met her eyes and said nothing. She's said to have stood perfectly still until the footman gently closed the door. Then she removed her glasses and pressed them between both hands. Her private secretary stepped closer, but she waved him away. And only after he'd gone did she allegedly whisper that they had made her invisible inside her own home. The title remained. The access was gone. That's a particular kind of humiliation. Not being shouted at or publicly condemned, but being quietly removed from a room you fully expected to walk into. A door closing while you're still standing there. Charles reportedly erupted when he learned she'd been turned away without any warning. He confronted William and accused him of letting a legal restriction curdle into public humiliation. William supposedly replied that the court's order couldn't be softened just because obedience had become painful. His calm only deepened the monarch's anger. But William was trapped between compassion and duty. He didn't want to punish Camilla. He just refused to let the palace look like it was dodging the judgment. Charles, though, reportedly heard that answer differently. He saw a son acting less like an heir and more like a replacement. Then the first frozen project surfaced, a major refurbishment tied to rooms used by Camilla's household. Independent reviewers allegedly found its urgency had been exaggerated, which only strengthened the belief that her office had been receiving unusual priority in the way resources were handed out. That evening, Charles summoned William again, and before William entered, Catherine reportedly stopped him and urged him to speak as a son, not as an enforcer. She'd been warning for months, it said, that financial transparency needed strengthening before the next grant review. Her concern reached well beyond Camilla. Catherine allegedly feared that old palace habits, the ones built on trust and private understanding, simply couldn't survive modern scrutiny anymore, and she was right. When William walked into the private library that night, there were no advisors between them, no legal folders, no constitutional phrases, just a father wounded by humiliation and a son burdened by what came next. Charles had spent days fighting the judgment, as though authority alone were the stake, but William reportedly discovered that the king's deepest fear had nothing to do with royal money. It was losing the woman who had stood beside him through everything. Charles is said to have poured 2 glasses of water and left both untouched. He told William everyone expected him to choose between Camilla and the monarchy, as though one had to be sacrificed to save the other. William answered that accountability didn't require abandonment. Defending her dignity, he reportedly said, was not the same as defending her access to public funds, and he promised he would never support deliberate humiliation. The monarch's anger allegedly weakened. He admitted he feared Camilla would read his compliance as proof he'd never truly protected her. She'd endured years of hostility at his side, and he couldn't bear to become one more person who stepped away the moment loyalty grew difficult. William reportedly listened without interrupting, then told him plainly the judgment had to be accepted in full, and that's when Charles finally confessed the things shame had kept buried. He had suspected informal pressure was being used before the inquiry ever went public. He'd seen the warning signs, but he'd avoided demanding answers because he feared what those answers might do to his marriage. He hadn't been unaware. He had chosen not to look. That admission reportedly changed everything between father and son. For once, neither man tried to win. Both tried to preserve what remained. The next morning, Charles decided to issue a statement, accepting the court's restrictions and endorsing permanent independent oversight. He reportedly told Camilla himself before the announcement, refusing to let officials deliver the blow. The statement's first sentence, it said, offered surrender without cruelty. Within hours, every major broadcast carried it. The palace had finally chosen acceptance over resistance. But outside the gates, the nation was already deciding whether Charles's change of heart was courage, weakness, or the first honest act of a wounded reign. The morning edition of the Daily Chronicle reportedly ran a full-page photograph beneath the headline, "The Crown Closes Its Own Door." Reporters held copies over their heads outside Buckingham Palace as broadcasters repeated the phrase across the world. By midday, crowds had gathered near the Victoria Memorial. Some allegedly carried signs reading, "Public money, public rules." Others laid flowers beside the palace railings in support of Charles. One woman reportedly told a broadcaster the monarch looked broken, but added that accepting the ruling might be the first step toward restoring trust. Inside the palace, Charles reportedly watched the coverage in silence. When the newspaper flashed on screen, he ordered an aide to switch off the television. Seconds later, he changed his mind and asked for the volume back. He would hear the criticism rather than hide from it. Camilla, it said, refused to watch at all. She sat alone and read his statement twice. It confirmed her exclusion, but never condemned her personally, and that restraint left her torn between gratitude and resentment. Broadcasters soon reported that support for independent oversight had climbed sharply, while confidence in the monarchy had begun to recover. Charles had lost control, yet surrendering, it was somehow preserving the crown. That's the paradox sitting at the center of this whole thing. The move that felt like defeat was the very thing that stopped the bleeding. That evening, Charles reportedly asked Camilla to meet him one more time. This time, no evidence file waited between them. The crisis had begun with the court stripping her of financial authority, but it ended with something far more profound. A king accepting that love could not be used as constitutional permission. Charles reportedly told her he would not appeal the restrictions. The sovereign grant would remain permanently separated from her private influence. Independent reviewers would examine every decision and require written approval. Her office could still manage charitable work, ceremonial duties, and personal matters, but it could no longer shape public spending. Camilla asked whether he believed she'd deliberately harmed the crown. Charles reportedly answered that he didn't think she'd intended destruction, but that loyalty, frustration, and entitlement had blurred a boundary that should never have been crossed. His acceptance of the ruling, it said, prevented a drawn-out constitutional confrontation and spared the monarchy from appearing to sit above the standards demanded of every other public institution. And Camilla, at last, reportedly admitted she'd treated resistance from officials as disrespect rather than warning. She offered no dramatic apology. Instead, she acknowledged that invoking Charles's wishes had placed staff in an impossible position. For the first time, she accepted the hardest truth of the entire crisis. Good intentions could not erase damaging consequences. Charles reportedly told her she remained his wife and his companion, but that her future place within the monarchy would be defined by service, not access. He reached across the table, and after a long hesitation, Camilla took his hand. Their marriage survived. The silent privileges surrounding it did not. William later accepted a formal role supporting transparent grant governance, with independent auditors keeping final review powers. The prince didn't celebrate. He understood that reform had been bought through his father's humiliation and Camilla's loss of standing. And the monarch reportedly returned to duty, changed. He stopped calling the ruling an attack on his family. He began calling it a necessary correction. The judges hadn't destroyed the monarchy or ended his marriage. They had ended the belief that closeness to the sovereign could quietly become control over public money. And so the crisis closed, not with Camilla restored or Charles vindicated, but with the monarchy forced to choose its future. And choosing finally and decisively accountability over personal power.